I'm Jake Garay from the Garay Michaud team with Berkshire Hathaway, and you're listening to my podcast, Selling the Suburbs. I'm sitting down with real estate agents, investors, experts, and various professionals throughout the industry. On Selling the Suburbs, we're discussing the truth about real estate, entrepreneurship, and the ever-changing housing market.
I had no clue what I was going to do. I was a sociology major, interviewed, got a job as a night auditor at the Ramada Inn in Newburgh, did that for a year. 6 months through that, I said, what the hell am I doing 11 at night at 7 in the morning? So I decided to interview for both real estate and insurance, felt that real estate would be more fun, perhaps have weekends off. Boy, was I wrong. But anyways, got into real estate. And so I continued to work for 6 months at the night job and then 6 months during the day selling real estate. So I did that. It worked out. I was, my first year, I sold 9 homes, made $6,000, which back then wasn't too bad.
What year was this?
This was 1983. It was my first year. I literally tripled my income each of my first 3 years from 6 to 18 to 54,000.
Wow.
It worked out well, but again, the market was different. Back then the average price was about 70,000 or so. I used to get afraid when somebody would drive into the front of the office because I would be typically the only agent in the office, thinking that they were going to be looking for real estate, but it turned out pretty good.
How many agents were in the business back then? Obviously, much less population, much less housing. Was there a lot of agents still? I mean, now you see typical offices have 50, 100 agents each.
We had 3 or 4 agents in our office. Inventory was small. I mean, you drove 75 miles to show 5 houses. So there was no inventory at the time. Certainly it was a different culture, mostly older folks in the industry. So initially it was a little bit difficult because I was 23 years old trying to break into a business in an area that I didn't know anybody.
So I know you said you moved down to Poughkeepsie with your roommate. Why Poughkeepsie? Was he getting a job there? I mean, had you ever been there before?
I had never been to Poughkeepsie. So what brought me down besides my roommate is I had an internship after college at the Fresh Air Fund in Fishkill.
Okay.
So I worked there during the summer. So that kind of brought me down into his area, and then we moved in together and started living there.
That's funny. So why? Because I know a lot of parallels between real estate and insurance, a lot with insurance agents and real estate agents. What led you to go into real estate instead of insurance?
That's a great question. I just felt the interest in homes, perhaps, as opposed to trying to sell a product which was different than housing.
Right.
So I just felt that I would be more comfortable selling houses.
More passionate about
Absolutely.
houses and more interesting, more variability and all of that. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So obviously, 40 years ago, what are the differences? I know you mentioned it briefly, but in the market, and are there parallels to now in terms of what successful agents, because obviously back then, I'm sure there were those, super successful agents that, the top 1%. Was there any parallels between what they were doing then versus now? Like what was the difference?
No, I think it's very similar. I think real estate is a business that, if you work at it, you put time into it, you're going to get whatever you put into it back. And I think those agents that were always available, on call, showed up, they were the ones that were successful. There were plenty of agents at that time that, were part-timers per se, because it wasn't really a business, an occupation per se at the time.
So obviously this was internet and everything else. So can you talk a little bit about what you used to have to do? Because I know there was MLS books, and what would the listings come like once a week or something like that?
Once a week, we'd get a book that was disseminated from the multiple listing system, and each office got a book, and you would actually look through the book. And, if you had a customer, that's where you found your listings. It wasn't like it came out on a hot sheet or anything like that. So it was like once a week that it actually came out, and you looked through there, and it was different. You didn't have cell phones. If you had customers out that day, You know, I can remember my first offer that I ever wrote was on the hood of my car. I pulled over.
And what would you do? Fax it to the other agent?
I know that we didn't have a fax machine back then. So you actually had to take it to the office.
So you'd have to hand deliver the offers.
So and then once you filled it out, you actually called that other agent from a
like a phone booth?
A phone booth or something like that, or an office phone. So you had to find the nearest phone booth to make the call. And you wanted to get it in because, again, you wanted to be the first one in there. Right. It wasn't like the competition now where you had 5, 10, 15, 20 offers on a home in the first few days. You may have had one offer in the first 2 or 3, 5 days or so.
Wow.
So it was different. And, you know, it was just through the books.
So how did you find your clients?
So mostly it was either walk-ins, because we had my first company that I worked with was ERA Advanced with John Duguay on Route 9 in Wappingers, and we had a big sign out on Route 9, so we had walk-ins every now and then. Otherwise, it was through a yard arm sign on in front of a house.
Just people calling.
Yeah.
That's really it. And did you have like advertisement? Like, did people do billboards or newspapers or any of that stuff?
It was all in either the Poughkeepsie Journal at the time or local penny savers. That's where you advertised.
And in terms of like where the people were coming from, right? Was it a lot of people, because obviously it was much more rural back then, were people moving up still like we see today? Was that trend, has that trend been the same, or was it?
It's continued. Certainly when I first started, there was a lot of IBM relocation.
Because IBM was a big demand
Exactly.
factor.
So that was the bulk of our buyers and sellers were IBMers locally. And that's where, you know, IBM actually, you know, I use that in some of my articles that I sent out was I've been moved, you know, so it was just something that I had done back then.
So you're kind of in the business, this is going on. And then at what point did you start to see things transition to a more digital way of doing business?
Well, this was several years later, certainly.
Yeah.
Because my second year in the business, we ERA had an electronic format that we were able to, similar to fax, send out papers and listings to people and so forth. But it took several years to transition, certainly to, you know, other forms of advertising and so forth. But
do you remember when your first year with email was?
I do not. I do not.
I would be interested, you know, to see. So when you had at the beginning, how long would it take for a transaction? Like how long was it, once you get an accepted offer, how long would it take to close?
It was still similar. I mean, it was 60 to 75 days for a closing.
That's amazing considering how slow it still takes in New York compared to
other
40
states.
years ago.
Yeah. And that back then too.
Yeah.
You still had to use the attorneys and so forth. You had local lenders for the most part that you worked with.
So the process itself hasn't changed much. It's more so just the way of finding and doing business and, you know, the communication and all of that.
Exactly. That is all accelerated to today's time frame.
And obviously, you know, we talk about it now. You really have to be available 7 days a week and what feels like almost 24 hours a day. Was it like that back then?
It wasn't. You know, it was, if someone, you know, there was a lot more loyalty back then too. So if a customer called you, they stuck with you.
Right.
You know, it was
like you were their guy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because everybody had access to the same. There was no advantage that another agent had over somebody else.
More than just knowledge and personality.
Exactly.
Nowadays, I feel like it's so easy to just go online and find another agent that people will go and shop around. And, you know, we hear stories all the time of people who they'll be looking at 5 different houses with 5 different agents. There is no loyalty there.
It's so accessible today, unlike it was years
And there's probably a lot more realtors out there, right? I mean, there's just both locally and nationally.
10 times easily. Yeah. You know, we didn't have the competition.
Well, as the house prices get higher and the commissions get bigger, you can justify just doing a couple deals a year more than, you know, when it was 70,000, right?
Right. You know, and we've seen a change in commission rates. When I first started, it was 7% was the norm.
Wow.
So
that's a big chunk of change.
But don't forget,
granted, a big chunk of change on a percentage basis, but obviously at a $70,000 house, it's not.
Right. And then the commission splits were different back then because the buyer's agent actually got 60% of the transactional fees. So it wasn't on a 50-50 basis at the time.
Was it harder to find buyer or seller clients?
Um,
Because now I feel like, obviously we talk about it all the time. Brand new agents primarily work with buyers, right? The kind of premier client that you really want is a seller's agent. If you look at all the top agents, 60 to 70% at least of their business is sellers.
Right.
So was it always like that, or?
No, so that changes the longer you're in the business. For myself, I would say out of the first 9 transactions I had the first year, I had one which was a $26,000 listing, which when I brought it back into the office, my broker said it was overpriced. It sold for $25,000 3 days later, so I was happy. But back then, and it's the same thing here. For new buyers getting into the business, it's easier for them to work with buyers, or new agents rather, getting into the business. It's easier for them to work with buyers because they can kind of control, and the buyer's not going to yell at them per se.
Right.
Whereas the seller,
there's an expectation of performance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think with new agents getting into the business, I think for them to build up their business and portfolio for years to come, it's better for them to start with making sales because those buyers will turn, in fact, into sellers down the road.
Right. So obviously that back then, because I know you've done a lot of new construction, new development business as well. When did you start to do more of that? Was it right from the get-go, or was it after some time in the business?
No, we didn't have much new construction initially. It was just a spot builder here or there would have a lot that would build on. I think the first subdivision that we did was Castle Hill Estates on Old Hopewell Road, which was done in 1985. That was really the time where colonials were first introduced into Dutchess County, because prior to that, Dutchess County was predominantly a raised ranch county. So 1985 was the first subdivision that Ray Cronizer did and that we did as a company. And so from there, we did other subdivisions, whether it was in Wikipedia or Hopewell. So then we saw a lot of new construction coming in, and I was fortunate enough to meet with some developers and some builders and build up an inventory of builders and or subdivisions that I was able to market.
So kind of comparing now versus then, right? Because obviously you went through all the different cycles, the good cycles, the bad cycles. You've been through probably at least half a dozen different types of markets at this point. How does it compare now with like new construction per se? Because the big thing we've been talking about, it feels like since 2017, 2018 has been inventory. Is that something that you think, is that something that's here to stay, right? Like, are we just very similar to what you see downstate or in high density areas like Westchester and New Jersey and Connecticut, kind of the 45 to 60 mile radius around the city? It seems like everybody's having these issues, inventory issues. Do you think that's because of the lack of land and the lack of development? We don't really see these big subdivisions anymore. Do you think it's a combination of the buyer demand? Because it's kind of a very interesting market in a couple of different ways, and we don't really see the big, huge subdivisions like you saw maybe 20 years ago in the 2000s during the building boom.
Right, and I think you will see some new subdivisions coming in over the next few years, but I think some of the things that have happened is the cost for developing land and getting building permits and so forth has really gotten prohibitive, whereas the towns really have kind of shut that down and discouraged builders per se. So a lot of the builders that were local years ago really have faded away and gone into, just doing smaller projects as far as
get in, get
and
out,
things of that nature, flips per se. So we haven't seen the growth in new construction. There's definitely a demand. We can see where Toll Brothers and other, again, the larger companies have come into this area, and some local builders still have come in and, done quite well. There is definitely a demand for new construction.
Oh, definitely.
But we just haven't seen it.
So talking specifically more about new construction, have you seen builders, and obviously you mentioned kind of like the process itself for development and approvals and everything is very drawn out. Have you seen any builders over the years kind of going down south or moving their businesses elsewhere as a result? Because I know we hear it all the time, all of the new construction that's getting done down there, how quickly it is. I know the bigger national builders are pretty heavily invested down there, but have you seen anybody who kind of like gets up, moves their business to the Carolinas or Florida, or does any of that?
Not so much the local builders, but we've seen companies like Lennar, Altier Homes. These were some couple of the builders that were local at one point that have gone south because the demand has been greater, and perhaps the process for approval process has been simpler. So, some areas are more builder friendly. It's just not just right now. There is some land, but not a lot of vacant land that is going to be developed.
And it's pricey.
It's very expensive.
And I think people don't realize when it comes to new construction, I know we see it a lot in specific municipalities where there's a subdivision proposed and a lot of the local population pushes back on that.
Right.
But then at the same time, they're complaining about affordable housing, and they don't realize that the lack of new construction makes the existing housing stock more expensive, right? Because
Absolutely.
we see it all the time. We'll have a client come in and they'll want to spend $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 on a brand new construction home. And you go out and you look at these subdivisions, you look at what's out there, and there's nothing out there. And so they end up in a bidding war on a home that's 15, 20 years old and driving the price up that much more because they don't have the new inventory to choose from.
Right.
So it's kind of like, the people don't want the new construction, and I get the population and infrastructure constraints and things like that. But it's just making housing that much less accessible for so many people because of the fact that you don't have more homes to choose from. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. So I mean, where do you think, so obviously you mentioned you think there's going to be some new subdivisions coming. Do you think that you're going to see more builders even taking their businesses further north, going to areas that are maybe less expensive or maybe further east? I know here in Dutchess County, the eastern part of the county has always been underdeveloped compared to the western part of the county. Do you think you're going to see more development across the river or north or east? I mean, how have you seen the development push? Has it always been pretty, spread out where it is today? Or have you seen these areas kind of grow over the 40 years you've been in the business?
I think what we'll start to see is pockets of growth in and around the Route 22 corridor as that starts to develop and so forth. Will builders move more north, perhaps to the Albany area? Perhaps, because we're certainly seeing growth up there with new construction. There's still the demand. It's just, and I remember when Four Corners was developed, they actually had some housing that was for low to medium income buyers too, which was able to, create inventory there and certainly sell to families that otherwise couldn't afford new homes.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see more and more of that because it's just something that we're hearing about, it seems like weekly, with the demand and the need for it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Obviously, you've been, as we talked about, through a bunch of different cycles. How do you compare this market to the different cycles? Have you seen a market like this before? Is this something that you think is more unique? Like, how do you, when you look at the market overall and kind of what we're dealing with, the challenges we're facing, is there a time period in your career that you felt was very similar?
Well, we saw in the late 80s, early 90s, where there was tremendous growth and then it kind of fizzled out. Same thing happened 2005, 6, 7, 8, when the market went crazy, granted for different reasons, and then it just dropped off. Right now, the thing is with interest rates, that's really, it has a lot to do with people moving or staying right now. When I first got into the business, the interest rates were 14, 15%. My first house that I purchased, the interest rate was 11.75. At that time, I thought I died and gone to heaven. But granted, prices were lower, but I ended up getting 2 roommates to help me pay the bills. But I think what has happened is, with interest rates where they are right now, there's 60% of the general population has an interest rate currently below 4% per se. They're not going to move to a house where they're going to be paying 6 or 7%.
And a higher price.
Exactly. So, but there is still plenty of pent-up demand because of all these rental complexes that have filled up, and the demand is there for rentals, obviously. But there's plenty of buyers that are going to be coming from these rental places too. And you did ask, as far as the buyers, where are they coming from? They're still coming from Westchester. We're still seeing the growth.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just the natural progression. If you talk to anybody, even if they grew up here, their parents or their aunts and uncles, their grandparents came up from either the city, Lower Westchester, or somewhere similar to that. So I think that's a trend we're just going to continue to see. I mean, Manhattan is like the driving economic factor for the entire tri-state area. So as long as that keeps going, which it's not going anywhere, I think that's what we're going to continue to see drive the demand. But have you seen, because you just said something very interesting, your first house, you brought in 2 roommates to help you pay for it. Have you seen a shift in the psychology of buyers over your entire career? And what I mean by that is, like, at least we see it now. Buyers are very picky in what they want. They want to be something very specific. It's rare that you find someone who says, I just want a house. I'm happy to have my first house. It's not going to be permanent. Have you seen the psychology and kind of approach of a buyer? Because now it feels like everybody wants exactly what they want and they're not willing to compromise nearly as much. Was it always like that? Or do you think people were more willing to compromise knowing that there was a natural progression of life over the course of 20 or 30 years?
I don't think you thought about that as a temporary home back then. I think, even though the average time that perhaps someone moves in Dutchess County or the United States is every 5 to 7 years or so, I don't think you looked at it as a buyer when you're buying your first home. You looked at it as, this is all I can afford. I'm going to move there. What happened with myself is that values went up. I started to build up equity in my home and was able to take advantage of that and buy a second home. And I did that the same thing with my third home. I was able to use the equity to purchase another home. But, interest rates were lower and I was able to take advantage of that at that point. I think people with, current interest rates at 6%, they'll have to stay in their house for several years to build up some equity, and then they could do the same thing. And certainly values will continue to rise in Dutchess County. They always have. They started when I started about 40 years ago, they were 65 to 70,000 was the average home price. Today it's, almost the mid fours. So, it's going to continue. And housing is still the best investment ever.
Yeah. When you look at pricing wise, if you just follow, as we talked about, south to the city, the further south you go, the more expensive it is. And so as those prices rise, people are going to look for value. They're going to continue to look further and further north. That's why you look at New York City and, the median sale price of a condo down there is like $1.4 million. And then you look in Westchester, the median sale price is like $850,000. You look in Putnam, I think their median sale price is about $550 to $600, and ours right now is $430. So as you move more and more north, homes get a little bit cheaper. You get a little bit more bang for your buck, a little bit more value. So I don't think that's changing. I don't think we're seeing that shift anytime soon. So you're right. I mean, obviously the markets ebbs and they ebb and flow in terms of pricing. And you could probably speak a little bit towards, what was it like when the market changed in 2008? Did you see the writing on the wall leading up? Did it happen quickly? How long did it take for things to all of a sudden be like, okay, this is a big problem?
It happened very quickly. And I don't think anybody was really expecting it at the time. And then all of a sudden, values dropped tremendously and so forth. So, people hunkered down and stayed in their homes for several years. So there was it's a decline in house sales for several years. And then, as we get closer to where we are today, we saw, similar in like 2016, 17, prices were still low. And then, with the pandemic and around that time frame, prices really have skyrocketed with the buyers moving out of the city and so forth and taking advantage of home ownership.
So when you say it happened quickly, how fast, was it 6 months, 3 months, a year? Do you have a memory of oh my gosh, this is really, things are going to hell here?
I honestly, I don't remember how quickly it occurred, but I know it happened pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But I don't know the time frame.
And when we talk about people in the business at the time, did you see a lot of agents, a lot of companies go out? Did they see, builders?
Oh, absolutely. Even with IBM, restructuring and downsizing and so forth. A lot of the companies did locally.
Yeah.
Fairchild, there was a couple of companies locally that downsized, and because of that, there was an exodus from Dutchess County to other parts of the country.
Did that happen simultaneously with '07, '08, or was that downsizing with IBM and those companies a different time frame?
That certainly happened around that time frame, but I don't remember exactly.
So it was probably, so it probably was a result of the recession, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that probably put a pretty big dent in the number of transactions, home values, demand, all of that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So obviously we should also say, you are Dutchess County's all-time leader in home sales. How many homes have you sold now? What are you up to?
I'm probably around 3,500 year to date.
That's pretty remarkable. So basically an average of almost 100 a year for 40 years.
Just about. Well, I started slow, but the last 10, 15 years, I've probably done 125 to 150 deals a year. So,
So what year was it when you started the team?
It was probably 6 or 7 years ago when I initially started. We felt the need for a buyer's agent at that point. So I brought Karen Gamba in. I brought Ines Cerezo in as buyer's agents. So Ines has been with me for 6 or 7 years now. And I felt there was a need at that point to start doing that. And over the years, it certainly evolved with other agents that I've brought in and so forth to where we are today.
What was, because the team concept wasn't something that really existed prior to, what would you say, 2015, 2016 roughly? Have you, about that time?
Absolutely. So what started it was actually, I have an aunt in Rochester that sells real estate. She got in, about 10 years after I did. And she started a team there. So she actually started a team before I did. And so she gave me a lot of great ideas on how to work the team and so forth, to structure it and so forth. So it made it easier for myself with some ideas. And then certainly my wife got her license and helped me do the internet work and so forth, which was really I was able to grow my business because of a lot has to do with her.
That's awesome. So you were one of the first in the area, probably the first to have a team locally, right?
Perhaps.
So because there really wasn't, at least by, in terms of reputation and things of that nature, nobody really had the presence in terms of their team that you've had. Obviously now there's a lot more teams out there. It's almost all new agents, it seems like, join a team. And the way of doing business has changed a lot. Even since I was, got into the business in 2015, teams were just starting, and I saw some of them down in Lower Westchester with Houlihan Lawrence. We just saw the beginning of the team kind of trend, and the top agents were starting that. Now everybody, it seems like, has a team. So it's a very different way of doing business. Am I right?
It's more common now. And back then, 5, 10, 15 years ago, it was really the husband and wife teams. So there were teams, but they were a different
like
type
a partnership
of team.
couple type thing.
So now, certainly for newer agents getting into the business, they almost have to join a team to get the leads and so forth, because to start and, by yourself, unless you have a lot of contacts within the area, it's going to be extremely difficult.
Yeah.
You need that mentorship and so forth, the training, with a team to truly grow your own business.
It's almost like the team, because of the amount of agents that are in the business now, and we talked about before, each office seemingly has 50 to 100 agents. It's easy to just get lost in the numbers. But you mentioned when you first joined your first company, there was 3 or 4 agents in the office. So it's almost like that was like the original version of a team, or the team is like the version of what a real estate brokerage was 40 years ago.
Exactly.
So it's pretty remarkable, because you really do need that one-on-one mentorship and guidance. Otherwise, you're just trying to figure things out, and it's a very difficult business. I think a lot of people got in the business over the last 3 or 4 years because of how good the market was, and they thought that they could capitalize on that. But the reality is, it's really hard to get started in a hot market because you're competing against so many people, and everything is high leverage. So if you're a brand new agent and you're only working with buyers and you're losing out on bidding wars left and right, and you don't know how to make offers to get your offers accepted, it's going to be very frustrating. So it's important to have someone like yourself to mentor, to mentor that brand new agent. Otherwise, you're kind of just spinning your tires.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, going back to that, that's one of the reasons that I brought, I went after you so hard initially several years ago. I felt that, there was a time that I needed the assistance, whether it was the young millennials and so forth. And certainly you were ahead of your time in regard to that. So I truly appreciated that. And I saw that, and heard about you from other agents. So that's, I went and aggressively went after you and so forth, and had you join my team and so forth, so that, eventually we would be working together. And that's what I was looking forward to several years ago.
It's too funny that it started with a deal that we did together on a house where I sold Vinnie Martin the house. You had the listing. And now Vinny's on our team.
Absolutely.
So everything kind of came full circle, ironically. So you've obviously seen all different types of people in the business, all different types of agents. What do you think it is that sets the successful agents apart from the ones who maybe, I don't want to say fail, but aren't as successful?
The biggest thing is they have to be self-starters. You have to wake up every morning saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make so many calls and so forth. You have to, and just constantly tap your database. Anybody that you're out with, you have to be promoting yourself and or your business, your company, your team, whatever, at all times. And I think there's a lot of agents today that aren't comfortable perhaps promoting themselves or pushing themselves or talking about the business. But the main thing is you have to be a self-starter. You have to wake up in the morning saying, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go to the office, I'm going to make some calls and follow up with everything, every lead. You just never know. I'm just very fortunate that I've been doing this for so long. I'm still getting leads from buyers that I sold 25, 30, 35 years ago. And that in and of itself is wonderful. And that's what agents should be doing is, building a database and following up with them, because they will lead to other leads and other buyers, other sellers. But it's not a business that comes easily to everybody or most people unless you have contacts. And that's very rare in this business. You have to really build your own business.
I think you've always been a big proponent of, I think, two things as someone who's kind of observed for the last 4 years. And that was always extreme consistency, right? Like 12 months out of the year, you're in the office. And that's the other part is being in the office and showing up every single day. You always have made yourself available no matter what, whether you're on vacation, whether you're working, whatever it is. But you're always very consistent. And I think that's a big part of your success is the fact that you show up every single day. And we see it. We've seen it with whether it's agents who come into the office and join the company or join the team, the lack of consistency. And do you think that people come into the business with a misconception of what it's going to be?
Oh, absolutely. You hear, you could be a buyer, and certainly I've sold several homes to families or individuals that have later got into the business, and some have been successful. But a lot of new agents think it's very easy. It's a business that they want to get into because they like houses or whatever. They like people. But some people, they think it's easy, but in fact, it's not.
You might not like people after being an agent for a couple of years. No, but we hear that all the time with, oh, I like houses. And, so much of what we do has nothing to do with the house itself. It's so much more to do with the people and the psychology of how to handle situations. And I even know, members of the team have talked to just the valuable, the invaluable experience of hearing how you handle a conversation and the nuance of that conversation, I think is invaluable, because that's really what, we could have the same message, both of us, to the same person and get two completely different results out of that conversation, because it's all in how you talk to that person. And I think that's what people don't realize when they get in the business is you have to have people skills. You have to really know how to, like you said, handle the tough situations and the tough conversations, but also, how to, guide people and advise people, because I think a lot of people look at real estate agents as, we hear the term like door openers, right? And I think the really successful top tier agents are an advisor. There's someone who's there. And I'm sure you've had clients who call you about real estate purchases that you don't even have anything to do with because they want your advice and they trust your take on the market and things of that nature.
Absolutely. And it happens frequently.
I'm
People
sure.
buying out of the area and so forth. They call me. But again, this is a business that we all have to work together. So you don't want to build animosity in the business to anybody or any agents, because you're always going to be working together. And we all are we're working together as a team, whether it's us with another agent or whatever. It's the same. We have the same goal in mind. So,
Right.
We need to work together with everybody out there. And, we are trusted advisors, certainly.
Right. I think people think that, agents are very adversarial with the other. Like if you're a seller's agent, you're going to be very adversarial with the buyer's agent. And ultimately, you have a buyer who wants to buy a house and a seller who wants to sell a house. And the goal is for both of them to be able to get to a closing table and close. You just have to figure out the way to get it there in a kind of pleasant and positive way. So being adversarial and having animosity, like you said, is not the best avenue to get there. If you're going to end up, and we've had those deals where the buyer's unhappy, the seller's unhappy. You don't want that. And ultimately that's a poor reflection on the agent too. If everybody who's involved in the transaction's unhappy, we don't want that.
Right, right.
So what do you think of, because obviously, and let me ask this first, there's a lot of like these TV shows now about real estate. Did they have that 30 and 40 years ago? Were there reality TV? Was there any HGTV, any of that to kind of show, the glorification of whether it's home building or flipping or real estate agents? Any of that? Did any of that exist?
None of that existed 10, 20, 30 years ago.
So that's all in the last decade or so.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I mean, I think personally, it gives a lot of misconceptions on the business, and people watch, Selling Sunset or HGTV, and we get a lot of clients who are, let's say, interested in home flipping that come to us, and they've been watching every HGTV show, and then we have to be the ones to break the bad news that that's not really how it works.
Right, right.
So, I mean, do you think that's led to any sort of change in, the agents or, people joining the business?
Well, you're going to find some agents that are joining the business that want to be part of that flipping concept or whatever and do it themselves, because, they have the interaction with the attorneys, the home inspectors, the appraisers, the building inspectors, and so forth. So, they want to be a part of it sometimes, and they see, that there are opportunities out there for agents to make money too in that respect. But, it's like anything else. You have to do it and do it well. Otherwise,
don't do it at all.
No.
Any forecasts or predictions? Like, where do you see the market going over the next 12 months, 18 months, 24 months? What do you think's going to happen? I know we talk about this a lot, and it's constantly adjusting, right? A year ago, we're looking at interest rates, trying to figure out where we're going to go, and we see prices slightly dip, and now it seems like they're right back to where they were. Do you think we see prices leveling off, coming down a little bit, going up a little bit? Like, where do you see things going over the next year or two?
As long as there's a demand for housing, there's always going to be sales. And people have to have a home or a roof over their head. If interest rates continue where they are or go up any, I think it's going to slow the whole process down, because there's going to be, as I said, there's like 60% of the general population that have interest rates currently on their homes at 4% or below. There's no reason for them to move, to spend so much more money. It's just so much more expensive. So, with that in mind, prices may have to come down at some point, because people cannot continue to afford these prices. They can't.
Right. And it doesn't seem like we're seeing wage growth to match price growth, right? It's not like we're getting this robust growth in the economy where people are making more money. We're seeing layoffs happening. So it's kind of like, and then the flip side of that is, well, if we go into a minor recession and they start cutting interest rates and all of a sudden we're back at rates in the 4s again, then who the hell knows what's going to happen? Because then we do have all these buyers who maybe are waiting to buy. So it's tough. I know we talk about this almost, it seems like weekly in terms of what we're seeing, but it's definitely a different market than it was 12 months ago. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the market as well. I think people hear, transactions are down or sales are down. They see, new home starts are down and whatever these are, and they don't necessarily realize that the price of their home is maybe higher than it was 6 months ago or a year ago. They just think that the market's down. But to your point, that could change, right? It could go down if interest rates go back up. If we don't see, interest rates stabilizing or coming down, who knows?
Right. No, and we've seen it in the multiple listing stats recently where, sales are down month over month. Our inventory is starting to pick up. So, it's going to get competitive from a seller's perspective.
So that's the prediction.
Yes.
I was in the office and the deal had closed and Blake was calling me 3 years into the business.
Yes.
And Blake was always either 1 or 2 that year in sales, always, repeatedly. He had this big, giant, robust business that nobody else seemed to match. And he's calling me and I'm like, why is he calling me? He was like, it was like if, like the celebrity or like, the big all-star player is calling you. And he's like, hey, I'd love to get together and talk to you and grab lunch.
Yeah, you and every other mortgage officer, we hear that all the time. It's like, I don't have time for lunch for this guy. Why?
No, not at all. No. I was trying not to sound too excited.
Yeah.
So
McDonald's.
We went to the diner and we had lunch, and he presented this great opportunity to come and work. And I thought about it for a while. The timing of things, it's how life works. I was in a point in my business where I was hitting, I don't want to say a wall. I kind of went through the same sort of thing. When I really committed myself to my business, I tripled my business every year for the first 3 years. And I was kind of in this space where I knew that there was more to learn, but I wasn't learning anything where I was.
Sure.
And the top agents in my office weren't, there were great agents, they had great businesses, but they weren't doing the things that you were doing and kind of setting yourself apart and growing constantly. I was seeing a lot of agents who were at this point where they were kind of plateauing, right? They were doing the same thing over and over and over again. The volume was always very similar. And here you are kind of every year just continuously growing. So I thought, this is a great opportunity. And, the company culture was great. Everything just lined up to be the perfect fit. So it was, looking back, it was a no-brainer. I took, probably 3 or 4 months to decide and actually do it. But no, it was a great opportunity, and it was the best decision I ever made.
He was my only choice, so no, it was the only person I called. So I said, well, I'll wait. This son of a gun. People ask me, what do you do differently than other people? And it's just being yourself, being honest, and being consistent.
I think you have a secret that's not a secret. Right? You're very much an open book with everybody. You're very upfront. You're very honest. You'll tell people straight, which people respect. I think for you, the biggest testament that I can say to you and your career is that you talk to anybody in the business, anybody who knows you or doesn't know you, not a single person has a bad thing to say. And I hear that time and time again about you is people will say, it's really hard to be in the business and not only be in the business for as long as you have, but be as successful as you have. And you don't even have anybody who has anything bad to say. Like, I think even your biggest competitors would say that you're an honest, straightforward, just a genuinely great guy. But the thing is, I think your secret to success is it's not sexy. It's just consistency. It's showing up every day and consistency. Yeah. And people want that secret thing that they can do that just makes their life that much easier. And showing up every day and working your butt off is not what people want to hear when you say that.
But that's the truth. And
it is.
I'm not as smart as most people in the business, I'll be honest, and I'll tell them that. It's just I just enjoy what I do, and I think that comes across when you meet with people. They see that. They can see right through you if you're a true, if you're a salesman.
If you're snake oil salesman.
Yeah. And I enjoy what I do, and I tell everybody I do.
No, it's true. I mean, you say it all the time. You love what you do. It's definitely true. And I think people just appreciate that. They appreciate that kind of, because I don't think they see that way of doing business as much anymore. So much of everything today is like flashy, sexy, you know, we can do XYZ. We've got this great marketing plan. And there's validity to some of that if it's done properly and it's done truthfully. But so much of business today is like almost bait and switchy. Right? It's like we can put this great image together, but then it's like putting a Honda Civic engine in a Ferrari, right? You look under the hood and it's not really what they say it is.
Right.
And that's not the case with you. You know, you say what you are, you're consistent, you show up every day and you do what you say you're going to do, which we know does not happen often in this business. So it's just that, you know, the secret, I was going to ask you that same question, you know, what's your secret sauce? But you know, it's not
I
what
get
people
that asked frequently, and I don't have an answer to that. I don't have something special that I do differently than anybody else.
No, but
I've surrounded myself with some good people, and it's worked.
well, that's the other thing too, right? Is building a good team and aligning yourself with a good team. Obviously, you've been with Steven now for almost 40 years.
38 years.
Yeah.
38
So
years.
you've aligned yourself with someone who's very successful in the business, and you have, you know, Debbie, your wife, who's been a great asset for you since you started
Tremendous.
the team, and you've built a good, solid team of reliable people. So all of that adds up to, you know, what you got.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a sum of all of its parts, and that's what it is.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Over the years, we've accumulated, you know, whether it's attorneys, loan officers, you know, appraisers, electricians, plumbers. You know, we have people that we've used in the past that have worked out extremely well, and we were able to pass their names along to potential buyers and sellers. So again, because the team collectively is a wealth of information, we have all that information available to us.
And I also think like your network, I'm always amazed at you seemingly know everybody, right? Not even in real estate, but you know, whether it's developers, builders, whether it's even, you know, doctors and clients, you have a way of remembering things from 30, 35 years ago. You know people, you remember details about them, which I also think is, you know, what contributes to your success is you remember your clients' kids' names and, you know, what they're doing and all of those different things that people appreciate. They like to know that you care about what they're doing, but you know so many people. So your network is so expansive and you do a good job of staying in touch with them. And I know I've come into your office and been like, oh, I just met so-and-so. They said they knew you. And that happens like 3 times a week. So, you know, you know a lot of people and you've built that network, which is pretty remarkable because, as you said at the beginning, you know, you moved from a place that was 3-4 hours away with no network whatsoever, and then just through time and through effort and showing up, built this expansive network over 40 years where you're very well known.
Right. And I liken myself to someone that works at, and I say this frequently, to someone that works like at not the Grand Union, but Tops or whatever. You know, and if someone is an employee there, you go up there and ask them where the salt is. They'll know what row it is. It's the same thing with me and my business. If someone asks me about a particular neighborhood or builder, developer, or attorney, I'll know typically a lot about all of this stuff.
What's your office have? The plans to every subdivision that's been done for the last 30, 40 years?
Yeah.
I also think that going back to what we talked about before, one of the things that I think helps you a lot is you don't have a huge ego like some of these people, you know? And I think that people appreciate that. And you just, again, to your honesty and how you talk to people, you don't talk down to people. You talk to them as an equal, whether it's the brand new person in the business or whether it's a client. You're never, you know, yelling at someone or getting worked up. Like it's always just positivity, you know, no big ego. And you just are very humble in how you go about your business. So I think people appreciate that.
I think that's a result of the way I was brought up and so forth, you know, coming from a family that worked extremely hard. And, you know, I wouldn't say we were poor, but we didn't have much money, you know, and just, I appreciate, I think, everything that I had growing up. And I do the same thing today.
Yeah. And that shows. It definitely shows.
So going back to my upbringing, of course, I grew up in my parents had a campground mobile home park in Lake Placid. And I, you know, worked for them for many, many years. We used to go out bucketing. It's one of the things that we used to do. We'd get a little bucket and we get 5 cents for every time we filled it up with cigarette butts or things of that nature back then. But then when I was 14, I worked for the state because I was, I felt it at the time, and I used to ride my bicycle to the bobsled run, where I had my job there. And it was a couple miles away or so, and every day I'd be working with like 10 or 12 other guys, and we'd be shoveling. They called me the steam shovel. I made them look bad because I just liked to work, and they would stand there and watch me work. But that's just the way it was. I just, if my parents asked me to do something, I did it.
It's just ingrained in your DNA.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, even now when you talk about going home or, going up to the lake, and you talk about your love of just doing landscape work and work around the house and all of that, it's just you enjoy hard work.
I love it. I do. I hate to say it, but yeah.
No, I mean, there's something to be said about getting satisfaction out of accomplishing a task, right? I think that's, it's enjoyable. You set out to do something, you do it. There's satisfaction. You can't beat that hard-earned, task, getting that done.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I come from a little bit different of a perspective. Mine was, and probably similar in some ways, but like I always, number one, playing sports growing up was super competitive. So like, it was always like, there's a part of me that doesn't want to get outworked by anybody that I'm working with. So whether it's work, whether it was sports, I just wanted to win at whatever I'm doing. And ask anybody who knows me, I'm super competitive. I could, whether it's playing a sport that I've never played before, like, I've been playing pickleball. I'm like super competitive. Like, we went and played on Mother's Day, and I'm like beating my mom on Mother's Day at pickleball because I just can't help myself. Playing cards or I played hockey, baseball, and soccer growing up. It was always very competitive. Like I just enjoyed like me versus you. Let's just go at it and see who's better. And also just, working growing up, my dad has always been a ridiculously hard worker. He would work 7 days a week since literally I can remember, whether it was he'd be out of the house 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, back at 8 o'clock at night, but somehow always made a way to show up to every sporting event, every school event, everything. He would bring me along, whether it was we'd get a snowstorm and he'd bring me to go and shovel the job sites or shovel the properties, do snow and lawn care. And, he always made sure if I was home on Thanksgiving break for, 10 years old, he'd be bringing me to the job site. I remember when he built our house that I grew up in, I think I was 5. And there's like photos of me in there at 9:30 at night, like handing him wood while he's trying to finish the house. So it was something that it was almost like, an opportunity to spend time with the family and get things done. And it's not like, look, if I was 15 years old, I wasn't like ecstatic to go and put mulch in the flower beds at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning. But, you go and you get it done. And I think that's something that you have to have that ability, even when you don't want to do something, to get it done and get the task done. And afterwards, you always feel happy that you did it, even if you don't want to do it. And I think there's a lot of people that don't want to go and do the thing that they don't want to do. They just want to avoid the thing that they don't want to do.
And I think to that extent, we're both very similar in the sense that we're both driven and competitive. I'm very similar to Jake. We're very competitive. I mean, whether it's pickleball, chess, checkers, cards, I hate to lose.
Yep. We're always checking the numbers even now to see where everything is. And
it's just that competitive spirit, that drive is something in this business I find that athletes do extremely well in real estate.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, what did you say? Baseball, hockey, and soccer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the 3 sports that I played as well growing up. And the life lessons looking back that you learn from playing sports, whether it's work ethic, whether it's leadership, whether it's being on a team, that can't be replicated.
No.
And you don't realize it because you're just playing a game, but it's really a precursor to what you're going to have to deal with for the rest of your life.
Right. When I first even thought about bringing Jake on, I saw some qualities in him. I didn't know that much about him, to be honest with you. We just did a deal together and so forth, and I just felt comfortable that, hey, we had some good conversations. This might be a good fit at some point. So I said, let me reach out to him, and you you joined the team and so forth, and I was certainly thrilled to see that happen. But I think what you've brought to the table is some things that I had very little skills in, such as whether it's the computer, the internet, and things of that nature. You had a skill set that certainly I looked up to, and I still do, that I'll never be able to, duplicate. I can't. And, you bring a certain presence also to whether it's meetings and things of that nature that I'll never bring. I have my own presence, but you have a different presence that people will listen to you and appreciate what you have to say also as much as listening to me. So it's not like I'm the only one that they're going to listen to and follow. They will definitely listen to you as much or more than me, certainly. And you've taken that leadership role, which I truly appreciate. And, it's worked out quite well. And I think to a person on the team, I think everybody looks up to you as much as they look up to me. And that's a quality that, it's worked out for both of us.
Thank you. And I think in a lot of ways we have very similar style, and in some ways we have different style. So it's I think we complement each other well in that sense. Mm-hmm. So I know even to this day, I still come in and ask you questions all the time on how you handle things, because I just think that your experience and your perspective is invaluable to everybody. And I also think, honestly, in terms of what we were talking about before, I have the mentality that you always want to grow and always want to get better. And I think you do too. I don't know if everybody has that. And I think a lot of agents, they reach a certain point where they feel like, I know everything there is to know. I know what to do. I'm just going to make every decision. And that's why even to this day, I come to you with, what should you do? What would you do here? What would how would you handle this? Because I just think having your unique perspective on things and having that wealth of knowledge is invaluable. So I think it's a good compliment to have, together.
It's worked out well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. I think this is a good point to end. I want to thank you for coming. I'm glad we finally got to do this. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah, Jake, it was a pleasure.
Great having you.